Hi, everyone. Michael Connor, Executive Director of Rhizome. Rhizome is a nonprofit founded in 1996 by artist Mark Tribe that exists to champion digital art in all its forms. And this is our 30th anniversary. So we've been using this opportunity of co-hosting season 3 of the Artwrld podcast to have conversations with artists who have shaped Rhizome's past and future. And many of the conversations that we have, or many of the artists in our community, are people who, might work um, in different kinds of experimental fields and fashions, let's say. So not necessarily what you think of as like contemporary artists with a capital A, but maybe people that experiment on the web or do really interesting apps or software-based experiments. But many of our artists also kind of pursue more careers in where they make work that can be seen in a gallery. And that's true of today's artist, Agnieszka Kurant, who has an exhibition in New York on view through 21st of March. Recursion is Agnieszka's second solo exhibition, and it brings together new and recent, or with the gallery, and it brings together new and recent works that are kind of speculative thought experiments developed in collaboration with scientists and linguists, engineers, and philosophers. And um, Agnieszka and I actually met back in Liverpool when I lived there, like a number of our guests so far, actually. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, but we've been in conversation many times over the years, but I think this is our first kind of formal public event together. And Agnieszka's work really deals with, especially in its more recent iterations, kind of collective intelligence and collective knowledge and non-human intelligence as well, and the way these things can be sort of harnessed or brought to bear in different kinds of systems, which might reflect, both digital objects or real physical materials. So a fascinating practice with a really rich philosophy behind it. And I'm excited to hear today from Agnieszka Kurant. Agnieszka, do you want to share some of your work with us?
With pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting me here. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Michael. And for the intro, I'm going to share my screen. Um, and all right. So the exhibition Recursion is at on view until March 21st at Marian Goodman Gallery. Um, this is my second show with Marian Goodman. And the exhibition, most of my practice relates to the questions of collective intelligence and, yes, as Michael explained, non-human intelligences, and also forms of exploitation present in digital capitalism. I've been preoccupied with questions of how forms such as termite mounds or social movements, tools, languages, currencies, how they emerge in complex systems such as society, such as human brain, such as the stock market. So I've been looking at, and I've been sometimes creating environments or systems or networks that produce such forms in a largely uncontrolled, unpredictable ways. And very often I'm shaping my works on more kind of growing them or shaping them on molecular level. And so this exhibition is specifically examining the ways in which capitalism converts human culture into a kind of reservoir of data that are rendering us all part of this vast recursive machines. This is done through capturing of our data by corporations such as Google or Amazon or Meta that are absorbing our data, but then recomputing them using feedback loops to forecast behavior, to automate decisions, and to preempt and monetize various futures. And so this mechanism of recursion of like this constant feedback loop or folding the data back into the system is also leading to a situation where the algorithms of artificial intelligence require more and more data as they are getting better, more and more um, energy to power more stronger computers, more and more water to cool them, and so on and so on. So this is basically a recursive process of this endless feedback loop. And so I got interested in other feedback loops that are driving other systems, and especially, recursion present in languages, recursion present in economic markets, um, uh, recursion present also with our predictions of the future. And this is one of the main topics of the show, and how predicting the future actively shapes it, how these predictions are actually changing our behavior. We are adapting when we learn about something that might happen in the future. So the futures that were predicted, they will actually never happen as such. And another question that I'm addressing here is intelligence and different kind of markers of intelligence, and actually the ability to anticipate and predict the future. This has been used as one of the markers of intelligence. And also, many scientists are talking about how consciousness and intelligence are arising from very simple building blocks, from very simple primitive organisms that are creating these feedback loops about their own internal states. So imagine a bacteria or a cell that is constantly checking whether they are still alive or not, if they need water or nutrients. And this essentially is the kind of more simple kind of building block out of which, on kind of more complex levels of evolution, more complex levels of intelligence were created, and eventually somewhere on this evolutionary ladder, consciousness has emerged. But of course, now there are conversations about whether consciousness is even required to have intelligence, and probably not. So these are the topics that I'm exploring here in this show. And so the piece in the windows that you can see, the letters, are actually related to and one of the technologies, early technologies that interests me, language. And in this case, the words that you can see, the lettering on the windows, is the meaning of the word future in 14 different languages, which are imagining the future to be spatially located, not in ahead of us, in front of us, like Western worldviews, Western cultures do, but instead they imagine future to be coming from behind you, from above you, or from below you. And when I discovered this, it was really very fascinating discovery for me, because how can we even talk about common futures if we don't kind of have a consensus about where this future is physically, spatially located? So I translated the word future into these languages that are mostly indigenous languages, including indigenous language of Aymara in from the Amazon, Malagasy from Madagascar, Yupno from Papua New Guinea, and certain dialects of Arabic and Vietnamese. So here are all these words executed in like a mirror acrylic, so you can see what is behind you, but at the same time looking on the street and see what is behind that. Um, Now, this piece, which is the kind of central piece of the show, is titled Uncomputables, and draws on experiments of a famous British cybernetician who also briefly worked as an artist later on. His name was Gordon Pask, and he worked for the British military in the early 1950s. And his experiments, actually, he collaborated for a while with another cybernetician who became significantly more famous, Stafford Beer. And together they were doing experiments around how, well, unconventional computing, simulating a human brain or an organization, and thinking about how uh, one could grow solutions to problems instead of computing them numerically. So Pask was doing tests in a petri dish, like in a very small scale, with the same blue liquid you can see inside of this cube here. He was passing electric currents and sound waves through this liquid, and he was hoping that one day in the future there will be a way of delivering data to this solution so that some actual problems could be solved. But in any case, he was growing some kind of solutions, looking at, very complex ecosystems such as seas, lakes, or ponds that are technically solving problems that go far beyond human thinking, and they don't need consciousness or human intelligence. So he was growing these forms in this liquid, and there was no way of preserving them. They were very ephemeral, and so the British military discontinued these experiments. But I was very interested in this, and so I continued and developed it further. So what you see is like the cables that are connected to the electrodes, and I mean the electrodes are connected to the anodes, and then in this liquid, the liquid which is copper sulfide, forms are growing in response to how they are, how this electric currents are animated by delivery of electric currents. And the data that is animating these electric currents is drawn in real time from online data, ranging from the data from the Fed to for example, different conversations about currently unsolvable problems. So whatever is currently discussed as unsolvable, for example, this week, is kind of translated into electric impulses that are animating the growth of various forms. And this is how they're growing. And then we take out these forms from this aquarium, and then they are later nickel plated and chrome plated. So they are suspended in the gallery, as you can see here. Other works in the show are involving my collaboration with the paleoanthropologist Genevieve von Petzinger, who published this very influential book a couple of years ago titled First Signs. She made a major discovery that inside of all these famous caves like Lascaux and Altamira, apart from the beautiful paintings of animals, there were also different inscriptions, technically, different symbols or signs that were completely ignored by anthropologists for many years as something more simple or primitive. But actually, it seems that some of them are up to 40,000 years old, and they were the very first attempts at establishing some kind of symbolic communication system of symbols that would convey a message beyond the close group or family. And so this is a fascinating moment in human development and also a fascinating discovery. And so I asked Genevieve to share with me her archive of images because she travels with her husband, who's a photographer. And she actually identified that there are only 32 signs that are in various configurations reappearing in all the caves around Europe, Asia, North Africa. And so I thought that the whole data set that she had of all these images is a great training set. So we trained it on all the images, and then I started producing new signs that are that look like this, and they were then executed on these. I'm going to jump after a few images forward. Yes, you can see more images. So they were executed with bacteria that are this very another interesting discovery discovered in Australia. They are cyanobacteria that helped certain instances of rock art survive for up to 80,000 years because they kept colonizing and self-colonizing the pigments and eventually replaced the pigments that early humans used. So now they are named living pigments, and they keep kind of self-colonizing and producing this natural pigment. So in a lab, I have mutated these bacteria with genes from corals and jellyfish to produce pigments that are also bacterial pigments, but they look very synthetic. They are blue or pink, and so and these are these works. Then another central piece of the show is Recursivity, which was originally commissioned for Bourse de Commerce Pinot collection in Paris for the exhibition curated by Karol and Krzysztof Bakardziew a year and a half ago, entitled Arte Povera. It was an exhibition of Arte Povera with a couple of contemporary artists complementing this absolutely amazing art movement. So I developed this chameleons. That this project is also based on a conversation thought experiment riddle that was posed by two cyberneticists, Stuart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, and Gregory Bateson, author of The Ecology of Mind, important anthropologists. So they posed themselves a riddle in 1960, so excuse me, 1973. What would happen if we took a living chameleon and put it in front of the mirror? And the question was whether it's going to go berserk, if it's going to become gray, or it's going to explode, because obviously chameleons are trying to resemble themselves. They're trying to blend in their environment. And so the question here was what will happen? And of course, they never conducted this experiment, but I decided to cast these chameleons in bronze and cover them with liquid crystal pigments. So I'm using liquid crystals, which are, of course, the components of liquid crystal screens of your phones, of your computer screens. And the liquid crystal reacts to electricity, and liquid crystal pigments, which I'm using here, they react to changes in temperature. So inside each sculpture, there are heating and cooling elements that are then animated by a control system, computerized control system, and each inside of the pedestal, there is a computer, and artificial intelligence is collecting information about how people are talking, speculating about the future of the world. And so these speculations are kind of mapped on the animal's skin, and they are changing all the time. So you can see how it's constantly looking different. And the like you come back after 5 minutes and it looks completely different. So this is recursivity. Of course, it's also a perpetual mirror test. It's this idea of like, very a lot of tests for intelligence, for example, in children, or the kind of pivotal phase in the development of a child is the mirror stage. And when a child starts to gradually recognize their own image in the mirror and identify as themselves, this is me. And so now these kind of tests are also performed for other for animals, for non-human animals like dogs and cats. And surprisingly, neither cats nor majority of dogs pass the mirror test. They actually think it's a different dog or a different cat. But surprisingly, some birds like magpies, they do pass this test. But of course, this whole like kind of mirror test conversation is related to questions of whether consciousness is even required to develop intelligence. And of course, it is not. Um, and I will now show you other works. This is another project in the show that I developed with a computational linguist, Gasper Begusz, who has his lab at Berkeley University. And so this is a project in which I am uh, collaborating with him on something I dreamed about for years. So I'm actually related to somebody who created Esperanto language, Ludwig Zamenhof. And you know, I was thinking what would happen to create this kind of universal language using AI. And also, when I was in my 20s, I met the Polish science fiction writer Stanislav Lem, who wrote Solaris, among many other books. And he has actually imagined a kind of parallel synthetic reality that we once might create, in which we could potentially be able to have languages that would self-evolve without humans. And I got really interested in that. And so I asked Gaspar Begusz if we could train an AI on all existing languages and then start producing synthetic new languages that are created like in a petri dish in a lab without humans. But of course, as you know, languages require really the way that they were evolving is with human pain and love and suffering and blood and tears. And so the idea of like creating it in a lab is a kind of very zombie sort of experiment. And indeed, this project is very much about this whole thought experiment of philosophical zombies, and which is basically consisting in imagining beings identical to humans, but that do not have consciousness. And so what we hear in this film, so you can see um, these different uh, uh, these are different moments of the film. You can see at the bottom, you see the phonetic transcription of the language, because the languages that we created 100 languages that are complete with grammar, syntax, vocabulary, and phonetics. And we are now able to produce new sentences in them. And then I use different kinds of AIs to vocalize them. So what we hear in the movie is these vocalizations being spoken, and you can see what they mean in English. And all these sentences actually come from language textbooks, but I chose them in a very arbitrary way, things that seem kind of, poetic or philosophical or are related to questions of qualia and consciousness. And that the title of the work is Phantomatics. Then in the same back room, we have another thought experiment, which is a conversation between three people connected with hyperscanning devices, EEG, fMRI, and other ones. And the conversation between three people without words. So one person's thoughts and they were just kind of given prompts to think about their mental states, feelings of joy or pain, and also different experiences of color or sound or taste. So things that are essentially related to qualia, to things, to subjective experiences that are very difficult to express in words and difficult to have consensus about them. So one person was thinking about these things, and their brain was scanned with these devices, and directly using artificial intelligence, we generated 3D forms that were then shown to other participants, and then their brains and their reactions to the images they saw were then scanned, and then kind of a feedback loop was created. So this is constantly changing, and this piece is using an holographic screen, which is a very new technology used mostly by the military industry and pharmaceutical industry, but to my knowledge, not really used outside of this context yet. And the screen consists of 150 lenticules, as opposed to, when you have a lenticular print that you can have 2 or 3 different views of something. So here, each single frame has to be rendered in 150 frames. So it's very complicated and expensive to develop. But essentially, it's 3D, it's a holographic film. That is impossible to present this because the images are holographic. So the image looks different from each angle. And then in the same room, we also have these holograms entitled Risk Landscape. And this is from my exhibition at MoMA Luxembourg entitled Risk Landscape. So risk landscape is a term from finance, and it means uh, it's basically a portfolio of risks that can be created using AI by companies that charge individuals and other companies a lot of money for creating a portfolio of risks, of predictions of what could happen to an asset, a person, or an organization in the future. And these companies are using AI and also data, different kind of data, climate data, financial data, social unrest data, even terrorist threats data to create these predictions. But of course, once the client receives this prediction, they're going to change their behavior. So the future that was predicted will not unfold as predicted. So they're kind of phantoms, phantom futures that are being sold. And there's no guarantee that what was predicted is actually going to come true. So I was interested in this kind of poetic term, risk landscape. What kind of landscape is it? How does it relate to the history of landscape, making and painting and other mediums? So then I worked with a holographer. These are traditional holograms. They're holograms on glass. They are not screens. They're activated with very strong spotlight. And each one, I developed essentially a language with a 3D modeler to translate this abstract numerical data into these holograms. So you can see, the holograms change from left to right when you're moving, because I actually created not a typical hologram like they are normally made with, with, for example, how they're created is typically is that a person is seated or an object is placed, and then they are photographed from 360 degrees. But here, these holograms were made without a camera. They were made using game engine, and actually each hologram is a mini movie of a couple of seconds that unfolds, and the visitor kind of regulates the speed of the movie as they move from left to right, and they really unfold. I only have one quick work to show you. I'm going to switch off my screen sharing for just 1 second. And mm, just 1 second. And oh yes, exactly. So I'm going to share my screen again. Um, so this is I hope my video is playing. Is it playing? Okay, great. So this is a close-up of the piece Alien Internet, which is also in the show. It's using ferrofluid, a substance invented for the NASA in 1963, which is animated here in an electromagnetic field and suspended in a suspension fluid. And the piece is also animated by a computer and artificial intelligence, capturing data about all forms of life, non-human forms of life, different organisms such as birds and bird migrations, or elephant migrations, or antelopes, and even corals and sponges. Any living organisms other than humans that are currently surveyed with digital technologies. So among the institutions that survey animals, living organisms this way are, for example, Cornell University, which has even developed an app that some of you may know, BirdNet, and it relates to bird migrations. And you can actually, it's a kind of citizen science project. People can fold back different information into it. So there are many scientific institutes that are collecting this data. There are now also various digital platforms that do it. And what is the reason? One of the reasons is that many scientists have understood that collectively animals are able to predict the future as a kind of, as a collective computer, I would say, organic computer. How does this happen? So, for example, in Alcula in Italy, before a major earthquake that happened there, geese, about a month before the earthquake, started behaving very strangely, and nobody knew what was happening. But then eventually Geiger counters and other kind of seismic activity detectors were able to identify some anomalies, but it was way too late. And this region was really affected by the earthquake. And so a lot of scientific institutes realized that colonies of various organisms or flocks of birds or fish can anticipate various phenomena. So earthquake, tsunamis, floods, and of course pollution and other kind of events related to climate change. And they can anticipate it much earlier before any of our technological devices. So this is a fascinating process, and now I have kind of tapped into it and collected all this different, data from different platforms, and this is animating how this ferrofluid superorganism is behaving inside of this installation. Actually, if do I have another 3 minutes to present the last work? Okay, great. I'm going to stop sharing and come back to my um, presentation again. Okay. Um, I'm gonna share my presentation. Okay, um, so this is oh, uh, so the last book I want to talk about is an NFT project actually that I did that was collected recently as one of the first NFTs that entered the collection of Centre Pompidou. This is an NFT and physical sculpture that I'm presenting in the show, titled Sentimentite. The physical sculpture is consisting of over 60 objects that I have collected that were used as currencies, as money throughout the history of human civilization. So I collected everything that humans used, from beads and shells to corn to whale teeth used in Fiji up to the beginning of 20th century, but also objects that were circulated in prisons, such as cigarettes, and as different objects circulated in kindergartens, in schools, whatever was even used during a war or migration. Currently, during the conflict in during the invasion of Ukraine, or in during the um, uh, invasion of Gaza. So I was basically using all the objects that are temporarily also circulating in various communities as currency, as money. And I brought them to a facility in Switzerland, and we pulverized them all. And I created this uh, new mineral that you can see here. And the digital part of the project is an NFT. So there are 100 digital fragments of this mineral that were traded. They are on a blockchain, and they were priced in ETH. So as the price of ETH was fluctuating, the actual value of this currency was also fluctuating. And plus how they are now circulating, because they're now sold out and changing, owners in this network. This also influences the value of the entire currency, this kind of quasi currency, and the digital NFTs could be some of them redeemed in this new mineral that I created. And of course, I'm interested in this kind of network value creation and how it relates, obviously, especially now with the fluctuation of minerals related very intensely to what's happening in the media sphere. So the digital forms of this mineral were developed. Actually, the whole project was developed in collaboration with the platform Zine, including Peter Halsgrove and Shimon Basar. And the this 100 fragments, digital fragments of this mineral that are evolving were created. These digital forms were created based on a kind of visual language, geological language that I developed related to different kind of opinion dynamics and conversations that emerged online around 100 most seismic events from the beginning of social media. So the events that sent like ripples through the system from Occupy Wall Street or Arab Spring to landing of Mars rover on Mars to Fukushima disaster to the death of David Bowie, and what kind of like storms online this caused, because of course these corporations that are using our data use it as an opportunity to sell us most advertising to harbor like attention of viewers. So maybe I'm going to stop here. That's all.
That was amazing. Thank you, Agnieszka.
You're
Really
welcome.
incredible show. Yeah. The last piece is not in the current show, though, right? It was
It
prior.
is.
Oh,
It
it is
is.
in the current show as well. Excellent.
Yeah.
Um, I want to jump in and ask the first question, which is sound has already asked this to some degree, but maybe in a more specific way. But my general question is I'm very fascinated by the way that you approach collaboration. And, many of the works involve a scientist or technologist. Genevieve Van Petzinger was one person that jumped out. Will you talk a bit about your theory of collaboration? How do you approach these people for collaboration, and what do you think they kind of are getting from that process? What are you sort of offering in the process of approaching them? What kind of emerges from the conversation that influences both the art and the science or technologist?
So, Michael, I have been collaborating with various scientists for many years. I work quite a lot at MIT, and I work with their artificial intelligence lab, CSAIL, and with many other scientists over the years. And when I first started working with scientists, it was very difficult because I was a completely unknown artist, and the scientists that I was approaching were very often very famous, very busy. They didn't have time to work with me. So after many failed attempts, eventually I was very, very lucky. And I found first scientists that were interested in experimenting and, kind of going a little bit somehow out of the box and doing things that actually brought something to the new to the picture. So the first significant collaboration that I have developed was with Paul Bardunias, who works at the University of Florida, and he's a consultant on at the Harvard University robotics lab, and he's an entomologist, and so I he got interested in what I was doing, and he was doing different experiments with termites, and I proposed something that he hasn't experimented with yet. So I learned that termites are almost blind, and that potentially you can exploit this collective blindness, that you can give them some other type of material to build with and they wouldn't notice it. So he was fascinated with this idea, and he was like he was thinking that maybe it could be something interesting for him to also discover what will happen if we actually give the uh, the termites these other alternative materials, and what can unfold from the situation. If they're going to build, will they notice that they're being exploited? And so this was like an adventure. And after this first collaboration, it was easier for me to explain to other scientists how sometimes it could also be interesting to them. And then the second like really significant collaboration was with several computer programmers, and eventually the MIT artificial intelligence lab with Professor Boris Katz, and then Professor John Gutak and their students, mostly their postdoc students. Um, uh, and yes, this was through the MIT Artists in Residence program, visiting artist program, but it's also kind of, like sort of you're going on a couple of blind dates, and it has to be a good fit. And but they were really interested in my idea that I developed eventually for two commissions that were then commissioned for the MIT for the two buildings that are there, their new biotech building and their new building, another building on Kendall Square, the residence of professors and postdocs, where they live. So this is the collective signatures where we collected all the signatures of the scientists and other academics that ever um, worked at MIT from the beginning of this university. So these scientists were interested in this because it involved the MIT community, because actually this was a problem that was interesting to them that I was trying to address, question of discovery of collective intelligence and discovery in science that very often just a Nobel Prize goes to one person or rarely to a small team of people, but in fact there are uh, thousands of people involved and sometimes generations of scientists or scientists in various countries involved in each discovery, and which team or person gets the Nobel Prize or another prestigious award very often depends on how much money a given university has. And there are brilliant scientists at universities, in Poland that are very often underfunded, and how many, postdocs or interns are exploited and never credited, from the beginning, from the get-go of science. So they were interested and kind of invested in this in these questions, and volunteered a lot of their time. And I think a lot of time it's basically because I'm unable to pay the scientists unless it's some project that we have a fee, but most of these collaborations happen because of the enthusiasm, just the economy of enthusiasm, as I call it, of scientists.
Yeah.
And so more recently, for example, Gaspar Begush, who collaborated with me on Phantomatics, the film, that one thing I forgot to mention, I was talking about this film, was the new synthetic languages, is that I assigned a color to each language. It's a film without images, and you just see different colors. As of course, colors are discussed as there are certain languages that don't have words for colors. So this is
Mhm.
why I chose a color for each language, and you just have four sentences in each language. And so, Gaspar developed it at his lab, and now these new languages are open source that we are going to share, the result of our experiments, and also the algorithm that is now can be used for generating, people can generate other languages. It's now open source. And it was, interesting for them to have a kind of different approach because, like my approach is like my background is in philosophy, and I work with a lot of philosophers. I've been in dialogue with a number of philosophers and sociologists, anthropologists. So for them to see it in a kind of broader view also was, my interest in AI and, questions that it's posing related to consciousness and sentience. And so for them, it was bringing different questions to the table that go beyond linguistics. And so this is how it unfolds.
Mhm.
All right, fantastic. So there's some great questions and comments in the chat, but I'm going to jump in and ask one for myself because I'm just going to be selfish. Um, one of the things that's really interesting is you're talking about the collaboration with MIT and that work being visible in the campus for their community. And I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the like who is the audience for the work and also the legibility of the work. So for example, like MIT has a museum where they interpret a lot of those things to their community and the public. I would imagine that a lot of times if someone went to the gallery show and they didn't have, you or a gallerist to kind of walk them through it, it might not be fully legible to sort of an everyday person that steps in. But like, how do you think about that? I mean, does that make the work more kind of like mysterious and seductive that it's encoded in a way for that, and there's an opportunity for sort of decoding?
Well, that's a good question. I, my works usually operate on various levels. So, essentially, most of my work is related to various horrors of, digital capitalism. I mean, this is like, I didn't have enough time to kind of dive deeper into this, but, for some that know my work or that could glean it from some of these works, it's all about kind of, the various forms of exploitation or capture of attention, extraction, energy, and so on. But the idea is to kind of attract people on a kind of visual level because I'm interested really in establishing dialogue with various kinds of audiences. Like I already have a dialogue and I have a kind of the ear of people who are, visitors of Rhizome or readers of Eflux Journal, and I really value this kind of relationships. But at the same time, it's important for me to establish relationships with broader audiences. So, the kind of visual aspect of the work is extremely important and the experience, so a lot of very often my works, they evoke the kind of feelings of magic or something, something is levitating, something is magically changing and transforming, and people don't know how these technologies work. And this is the goal. So they are kind of attracted to something on a visual level. And then it's my hope that because maybe it's interesting, that they're gonna start to, ask questions and try to understand what is it really about, what is happening here, and then a broader conversation can take place. So deliberately, some of them, have this layer that may be attractive visually, but maybe a little obscure. And then, if people are interested in digging deeper, then this other context can unfold. But for example, at MIT, the information about how this work was created is available. So in the public space, downstairs in this, like, in the under the canopy of these buildings, there are plaques that are explaining how this work was made, who else was involved. It's also very important for me to credit every single collaborator, not just the scientists, but also anybody else that was. So, if you go to the website of Marian Goodman Gallery, you go to the checklist of works, you will find names not just of the scientists, but also everybody else that was involved. So yeah, so this is very clearly communicated, but of course, depending how deep people want to dig.
Fantastic. Beth, you had a question. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, this work is really beautiful, very profound. Thank you. I was wondering about kind of the interactive piece. Like, do you build in ways for audience or viewers to interact with each other and make it sort of a communal creative process or a communal kind of sharing process? I was thinking especially about that one piece that's kind of quasi-therapeutic, the brain scans, and whether and it sounds like it is involving various people. And is there a way that you facilitate building community and more of connection, and kind of an emotional connection among the viewers in that process? Or is it just sort of whoever happens to walk through? You know what I mean?
This is interesting. So, this is a very new project that I essentially have developed for this exhibition and some other exhibitions that will happen this year. So I this is almost like a prototype, Um, and so we barely managed to finish this piece just for the opening. And I collaborated with wonderful scientists, including um, um, Adam Horowitz, who is the founder of the MIT Dream Lab, and he does incredible work into, for example, like a trauma that people have, that appears as, nightmares in their dreams, and how they can be treated with kind of like specific tailored treatment of PTSD by intervening in their dreams. So it's a really new field of neuroscience, and he actually works in an entire field. There are many other neuroscientists that are working on this subject. And two more collaborators, Philip Tolka and Antoine Bellemare, who have worked mostly in Canada, where they are conducting these experiments. So we are going to conduct more experiments in this field. This is the very first, I would say, proof of concept almost, because it was like we literally finished the day of the opening. But I am hoping to exactly the next step is to create potentially, conversation between multiple minds and maybe even a live component to it. This technology is quite expensive, especially the holographic screen. So, I'm hoping to develop it for my future exhibitions, and I'm happy to keep you updated.
All right, fantastic.
Agnieszka.
Mark Tribe, you had a question.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk, for sharing your work with us. Um, when you were showing Uncomputables early in your presentation, for
Yes.
those of y'all who didn't catch the title, that's the piece in a kind of cube of blue liquid, which is, I guess, copper sulfate and sulfuric acid in water. Um, I'm interested in correlations. You talked about various data sources that were then somehow translated into electrical signals or current that went into the water that then somehow produced the sculptural forms, right? These sort of like
Yes.
coral-like forms.
Yes.
Um, so I'm curious about the correlations, and I mean there are data inputs and then these abstract or well, in a lot of your work there are these data inputs that you sort of gloss, like financial data or events that put shockwaves through social media systems.
Yes.
Are specifically with uncomputables and then generally, are the correlations discernible to you? Does it matter? If they're not discernible, like if you can't tell the difference between how it grows or what the form is when you put in data from financial crashes versus data from social media having to do with mm, a moonshot or whatever, landing a rover on Mars. Does it matter if it's, does the input become purely symbolic, like a kind of conceptual gesture that, you know, remains purely on the level of concept and, or is it important that there be some kind of discernible formal correlation that whether or not that's perceivable to me as a viewer, you can tell,
Hmm.
right? I guess that's my question.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Mm, and by the way, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the data that is driving the changes in the chameleon's skin is how people are speculating about the future of the world. I forgot if I mentioned this or not. So it's this idea of speculation and then like the reflection and looking at the speculation and prediction. So yeah, this is a good question. Like none of these works like you can pinpoint like, oh, the chameleon just turned blue and this means that people are sad, or it doesn't work like a mood ring. I think that essentially the way that a lot of data and what kind of impact it has on various systems is through abstraction. So I'm inspired by the opposite. I'm inspired by this abstraction, relationship between abstraction and finance, or in the, I don't know, insurance industry or any kind of other, industry that is using these financial abstractions to essentially either extract energy or attention from people, or make decisions about people's future or their payments or their surveillance based on abstraction. So actually, I kind of deliberately, this is why a lot of these works involve various kinds of abstraction. So this is the kind of the opposite. Yeah, I mean, there are many artists that are actually precisely using specific data that can allow you to pinpoint this causes that, this causes that. And this is super interesting, but I am actually interested in more in precisely this kind of abstraction, or so what could emerge. I mean, of course, if somebody really wanted to, if this was like I don't know, somebody comes to me and decides to write an essay about this or something, and we could technically pinpoint what type of data is causing what effect. To give you the idea, in the risk landscape series, these holograms so when I developed this visual language, various kinds of risks and events caused different kind of changes of the landscape. So we would be technically able to somehow, to some degree, show what caused what and why this landscape is unfolding this way or another way. So it is feasible if somebody really wants to do it, but I'm more interested in the questions of abstraction and kind of like emergence of a form, of a system, of these parameters. Well, in the case of the blue cube, you know. We also set up these parameters. So, it's always the way that I work is that I don't create the form. I build the system, the environment, and the form grows or emerges or crystallizes by itself in a largely uncontrolled way. So I can tell you very specifically what parameters from the system caused which, for example, currents, what kind of intensity of a current, what frequency at which the current is flowing. So this we could tell you precisely, but because it's a kind of complex environment, and there are also like sound waves that are at play. I cannot pinpoint because precisely this is the point, to create an abstraction where you don't really know.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Levminovich article, The Anti-Sublime Ideal in Data Art, where he basically is arguing that data visualization was running against the kind of romantic tradition where you were supposed to be confronted by a phenomenon larger than you could possibly comprehend. And data art
Hmm.
was making it comprehensible. But your work
Yeah.
is kind of, I think, going a bit in the other direction where it's like there's correlation, but it's not meant to be legible in an immediate way necessarily.
Yes, exactly. It's
It
not data
points to the kind of
visualization.
unknowability of the
Yeah.
phenomena. Good
No,
catch.
thank you. It's not data visualization. Is that the antipodes of data visualization is, is a manifestation of abstractions that are present in how these corporations, take advantage of the black box abstraction of the data.
Yeah, I feel like marketing likes to do data visualization. It's like it's not a very, very romantic thing. All right, I
In
think
the
we have a
history
few minutes.
of modernism, there were two kinds of abstraction, objective and non-objective, right? Abstraction from a form, like Pete Mondrian, uh,
Mhm.
and then the non-objective abstraction, which is sort of or pure abstraction. And this is a third kind,
Mm.
but it's closer, I guess, to
Thank
non-objective
you. That's
abstraction.
very kind of you.
You're
That's
not, I
that's
mean, you're welcome. I mean, you're not alone. I mean, it's a pretty common practice. And you see it in music too, where you have some kind of input and then it results in something abstract. And we humans can't discern the correlation, even though it probably exists.
Yeah.
Um, and then the question we can't answer now is if we can't discern the correlation, why mention it? Why mention the source? Like, what does it do to the work to say? But,
okay.
I'm just leaving it out there.
Sure.
What work
Well,
does that do?
okay, this is a very good question. So, well, but in your everyday life, we constantly are confronted with situations that we're presented with results. Somebody's, for example, gets a certain fee for their insurance policy based on abstraction, or somebody's surveyed, or somebody's media surveyed based on abstraction. You don't get the information why you got this particular bill from your insurance company. It's calculated in a black box, and yet it's valid, and you have to pay, or you can just discontinue your insurance
So there's a
policy.
logic
Yeah.
of opacity that you're
Yeah.
reproducing.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'm interested in this. In a way, I'm criticizing this opacity. It's exactly. You know what interests me more than this kind of like, what this data specifically is pinpointing to, is the collective intelligence, and how this is all based on aggregation and on, millions or hundreds of thousands of digital footprints or inputs of people, like how it relates to question of aggregated labor. And not in this show currently, but in other exhibitions and in other works, I am referencing this, and for example platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk and crowd work, and so this is important for me, how the energy of crowds, where people become just this kind of non-discernible abstraction. And for example, one of the writers that I've been in conversation with, and who authored an essay for my book, which is being launched next week at Swiss Institute, was my two co-editors, Jenny Jaskey and Stefanie Hessler. Please come. It's on Thursday at 7 p.m. next week. Book entitled Collective Intelligence. But one of the contributors to this book, Nora Khan, for her essay for the book, mentions how this kind of workers became increasingly an abstraction. The digital workers, you don't know their faces, you don't really know because there are so many of them. They become an abstraction, and so this kind of obfuscating the identity, and just turning the worker to this collective worker, and eventually us all as providers of this data that become this kind of aggregated providers. This is what interests me, and not I'm not interested in data visualization. There are many artists that work with that, and this is not what I'm addressing.
Okay, we're at time. There were some questions in the chat that did not get answered. Just like DM me on LinkedIn or josh@artworld.com, and I will try to figure out how we can get those things answered for you in some way. Michael, do you want to give a little bit of a sign off and then hand it to Agnieszka to wrap it up for the week?
Well, just make sure to go check out Agnieszka's show if you're in New York before March 21st. Maybe some of us should go over there together next week now that we've had a nice discussion about it.
I'd be happy to help organize that.
Yeah.
And Agnieszka, any sort of parting thoughts or ideas for the community here?
So yes, I already kind of if I may, advertise our book launch at the Swiss Institute. So yeah, Thursday, March 12th at 7 p.m., Swiss Institute on St. Mark's Place. I'll be in conversation with Jenny Jaskey, Stefanie Hessler, the director of Swiss Institute, and Kate Crawford. So, Kate is one of the contributors to my book. So please join. And tomorrow at 4 p.m., I will be in conversation with the art historian David Josselit. 4 p.m., Marian Goodman Gallery, 385 Broadway in Tribeca. If you would like to join, please register. There is a website on Eventbrite or through the gallery. And everybody's welcome. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Absolutely
Thank you,
fantastic.
Agnieszka.
I'll send out that link to everybody. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you again, Agnieszka. Thank you, Michael, for this. We'll have another one of these next week. We haven't figured out who yet. Worst case scenario, Michael will do it, or Mark. We talked about you as well. But again, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Always wonderful way to enter into the weekend. Again, thank you. Have a wonderful week. Hope to see you soon. Thank you, Agnieszka. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Absolute pleasure. Bye.
Bye.